Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. CLAUDETTE.
Well, good morning, everybody. Just before afternoon. I feel rather sorry for myself right now because I've got to speak to a group of people who are suffering from information overload. Some of you pressing for coffee, but I'm hoping that each one of you will be able to get something out of the presentation. I have had to condense considerably in terms of the information that I've got to give to you today. I've got exactly 25 minutes to take you through a number of issues. So I hope that you'll be able to retain at least some of that information. I bring greetings from the Institute of Internal Auditors. I am not an internal auditor, let me just say that up front. I was poached by the Institute from SAICA in 2006, and a very, very happy stay for me, the Institute, because I have gotten to a point where I really am absolutely and totally committed to this profession because I believe it is one of the most important elements that we need in our country and our economy today in terms of ensuring the health and the wealth of our country. Just a very quick introduction. The IA, we are affiliated to a global body which is the creator and custodian of the international standards which internal auditors use, and then of course we also provide the moral compass for internal auditors through the Code of Ethics. But I want to start by talking in terms of the context, and I'm pretty sure that the speakers that you have had thus far would have brought this context for you in terms of where we're at. The world has become very volatile. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to sit in leadership positions. And if you don't feel, as an audit committee member or chair, if you don't feel like that person that you see on the screen at the moment, then you have not really realized what sits in your job. We are also in an era where leaders are really living in a fishbowl, as I call it, as more and more we find that our shareholders, citizens are becoming a lot more active in looking at what the leaders are doing. And in that context, internal audit is really in a unique position to be the trusted advisor to the leadership in the organization. But we have a great lack of understanding still. I often find that when people ask me, what do I do? And I say, I work for the Institute of Internal Auditors. The first response I get is, oh, you finance people. And I go, do I look like a finance person? I mean, really. But there is that lack of understanding, and often people think that external audit and internal audit are one and the same thing, and they're two distinctly different disciplines completely. But just very quickly, in terms of the value proposition of internal audit, governing bodies like yourselves and senior management rely on internal audit for objective assurance and insight on the effectiveness and efficiency of governance, risk management, and internal control processes. And the key elements therein is the assurance element, the insight. And this is really where, when we talk about insight, internal audit should have a very good understanding of the organization, being able to give management advice in terms of being that extra ears and eyes. But they need to have a very, very good understanding of the organization in order for them to be able to give you that insight. And of course, there need to be that objectivity. What I'm going to do now is just to quickly give you some input that we've pulled from the most recent CBOC report. That's the Common Body of Knowledge. It's a research survey that's been done by the IA globally every 5 years. And the most recent one, the key factors for internal audit to add value are objectivity, independence, compliance with the Institute's Code of Ethics, providing independent objective assurance and consulting. And both of those elements need to be there. There's the assurance side of things, but also I prefer to use the word advising instead of consulting because I think it's more explanatory in terms of the internal auditor's role. And then of course the compliance with the international standards. Those key factors have to be there. And as audit committees, you should ask the question, when you look at your internal audit function, whether those are in place. But in terms of it, when one looks at the value that internal audit brings to the table and what the elements are that should be in place, we also find that when we talk to our members, that there are a number of areas where internal audit's hands are really tied. And I heard a little bit of a discussion with Mr. Gordy earlier on, specifically talking about the public sector and internal audit to a large degree, their voice not being heard for various reasons. There's lack of support from leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I'm now not just talking about the executive leadership, but right up to those who are in the oversight bodies, making sure that internal audit is being supported as it needs to be. Findings not being taken seriously, recommendations not implemented, and too many instances where audit committees are not displaying enough strength. Now, I know I am most probably talking to the converted in the room, because if you're taken the time out to come to a conference like this, you probably are converted. And when I look at the landscape in South Africa, I think we've got pockets of excellence. There are areas where we really have our audit committees functioning very well. But we also have a lot of areas where the audit committees have not yet come into their own, where they haven't yet stepped into the rightful place and being able and being as strong as they should be, and their voices being as strong as they should be. And then we've got death threats where internal auditors blow the whistle. We hear a lot of complaints coming through. I was in Limpopo on Tuesday talking to the members, and just in terms, the discussions and the questions that had come from the floor, this is an area that was highlighted once again, where the internal auditors really feel the pain, and if there isn't cover from the audit committee, then it really becomes very difficult for them. And the audit committee is an oversight, as an oversight body. I put in there the question, do you work in the public interest? And I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves in the respective roles that we're in. Because often what happens is we tend to just focus on what is in front of us and what we think the immediate areas are that we need to focus on. And a lot of us are in full-time positions, and the audit committee role is an extra add-on that we do, and we run from one thing to the other. And just yesterday I was speaking to some of our members, and one of the things that I said to them was, I think where we are now, it's not so much about worrying about not having enough time. What we should be concerned about now as leaders is whether we're giving enough attention to everything that comes through our desk. Because we're suffering from information overload. We're dealing with so much. I see it in my own life. I look at my desk and everything that flows through the desk. I do not have enough time to really think, focus, and think deeply and rigorously about what is in front of me. And I hope for dear life that whatever decision that I'm making now, that I'm not missing something important, that's something of great importance. And the same in terms of serving an audit committee. When those packs come, I sit on Eunice's audit committee. When the pack arrives 4 days before the meeting and that thing is this thick, I just want to find a corner and cry. And the worry that goes through my head is, when I read through everything, am I thinking deeply enough? We're still finding people arriving in meetings and they haven't even opened the pack. They haven't even read the pack. And my question is, do we work in the public interest? Because here's the question, your organization, whether it's in the public sector, whether it's in the private sector, whether you're serving private investors or not, ultimately, it all links back to this country. And if we as leaders neglect our duties, what happens? There is a ripple effect, there is an escalation. So if the organization that you are in an oversight body of, if in the public sector, if it doesn't deliver, there's a ripple effect in the country. If in the private sector and your company goes under because the leadership wasn't vigilant enough, there's a ripple effect in the economy. So I would propose to you that as a leader, it's not just about leadership within that organization, but it's leader in the broader context of our country. And therefore, you do work in the public interest. And you have to, therefore, make sure that you ask the right questions. But you need to spend enough time on the issues to be able to come up with what the right questions are. And you need to be able to ask the tough questions. I inserted a picture there of protesters. And I think it's a relevant picture, not just for those in the public sector, but we've just seen what had happened at Marikana and what's happening in the mining sector. And as leaders, we need to take these things into consideration, because there is value in oversight. And number one, it is about strengthening accountability and understanding that in the time that we're living in now, accountability is becoming increasingly important for one important reason, and that is we have, as human beings, we've created these wonderful complex systems. How many of you know how to work more than 20% of your smartphone? You know the phone that's smarter than you, that's got wonderful functionalities on? That's just one example. That's just the phone that sits in front of you. We've created these complex systems, but human nature hasn't really changed. As a matter of fact, I think we've taken a step back. As if one looks at what's happened in recent times in terms of the financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, what is underlying all of these issues that we're dealing with, the corruption that we're dealing with in our country? It's human greed. So you take these complex systems and you add in the fallibility of humanity in it, and inevitably what we need is more accountability. And that's where you play a very, very important role. And then, of course, what gets measured gets done. I want to read this to you very quickly. What gets measured gets done. If you don't measure results, you can't tell success from failure. If you can't see success, you can't reward it. And the question is, do we actually know what success looks like in the organizations that we have oversight of? If you can't reward success, you are probably rewarding failure. And we have to reflect and be absolutely brutally honest with ourselves as leaders and ask ourselves the question, are we rewarding failure? Are we rewarding mediocrity in our country? Because this country has the potential to be a great nation. But we're being held back because our leadership layer is too thin, and not enough of us are willing to stand up and speak up and ask the right questions and ask the tough questions.